forward. As you probably know, do this Hot Topics presentation multiple times a year, but it changes. And in fact, the slides that I will present today, and I have a lot of them because I typically make them very dense with material so that later, first of all, so I can remember what to say, but that you can go back and review what I said and maybe use the information later more easily. But at any rate, this is a brand new deck. I've actually only delivered it twice, and you are my last webinar for this year, so that's good. But in a way, you're kind of one of the first. So today we're going to talk a lot about some OCR, Office for Civil Rights Communications that came out in September. Apparently, they presented a couple of different slide decks to different audiences. One on OCR audits and others on continuing enforcement hotspot areas. So I've actually merged them together into a presentation, and I did not hear either of these presentations firsthand, so I'm actually delivering this based on what I'm reading in the slides and what I've heard, but not directly from them. So I think I'm on target and accurate, and we'll just go from there. All right, let's see here. Click this so my slides move. So again, we're just really talking about two specific areas today, but as you will see, there's plenty of content on these two areas. And again, you know, if you need me, here's who I am, and that's my partner, and we build software and things like that. And I've got a list of what the software does. I'm not going to go over it here, but you're certainly welcome to review that. Of course, anybody wants to see it ever, I'd be happy to show it to you. Take a look at the Phase 2 audit program updates. Remember, OCR started their Phase 2 audit program last year. They initiated it through email. They asked some questions of, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500, who knows exactly how many sites were surveyed on the front end. And one of the questions they asked was how many business associates and who were your business associates? So of this 1,000 or 1,500 folks that they surveyed, they selected 166, I believe, for the audits. I've got the number here in the presentation. But they also selected business associates to audit. What blew them away was that they had 20,000 business associate names, something like that, something really huge. And they really didn't realize there were so many business associates, especially with larger healthcare institutions. Anyway, busy time. They got out there, and what you're going to see in my presentation, you will see links. They may not work directly where you click on them. I tried to hyperlink them, but if you'll just copy and paste them into your browser, you'll be able to go to the documents that I actually drew this from. So there you go. By the way, I thought that was really interesting. At the end of this slide, you see at the very bottom that the contact for the OCR audit is Zenithia Clemens. Zenithia, I don't know if y'all know this, is a HIMA member. She was a board member for a HIMA, very nice lady, very smart, and obviously well connected there at OCR. So it's good to know that one of us is up there in OCR, and she does a fine job. So anyway, what they did when they created this audit program was, again, sent out notices via email, and then they selected, they asked for data, and some number of covered entities responded and gave their data, and then OCR decided which ones they wanted to select. They did it from all over the nation, hospitals, health plans, physicians' offices, different types of covered entities, and, again, some business associates as well. And so what they said they would do, and now what apparently they have been doing, is that they have taken the documentation from the sites they audited, they analyzed that, they send it back to the site with their analysis. The site has a chance to respond to that, and then they eventually collate this and start to release the data. I believe that this is the first data that we're seeing, and more will come. Interestingly, in June, I was delivering a presentation on the OCR audits at FAHIMA, and a gentleman was standing there at the end of my session, and it turned out that he works with a company out of Tampa that was actually performing part of the audit. So very interesting to me that they actually used a contractor from some of this. Now, the important thing to understand is in the audits, they're trying not to be punitive. They are working to be educational. So they really want to look for hot spots. They want to find areas that they need to give more education in and support in. And that's very interesting to say. They do reserve the right to refer anyone that they've audited over for more enforcement action should there be egregious violations. The problem is they probably don't want to do that. I would suggest that that may be, stifling to willingness of people to provide all their information in an audit, which they're required to do, but it would be better for everybody to be happy with it. My problem is, and you're going to see this as we go through these slides, is that they have some very bad compliance as far as folks really meeting the requirements. So, it's fine to be educational, but you've got some not great results here. At least, again, this is by my read. So we'll see in the future if any of this actually leads to any enforcement actions. I would guess not, but again, I would suggest that you're going to see some of the findings are somewhat surprising here. All right, when they first announced the audit program, they put out a table up on the internet, which is a real pain. You couldn't download it into Excel. I had to copy and paste. A lot of other people did this too. But we created, they had actually 180 audit protocols, and they laid it out like this. And this is a copy of the documents. Now, I have as handouts these documents from OCR, but I've actually doctored them up a little bit. So they call them the audit protocol, 100 of them, 180. Some of them are for privacy, some are security, some are breach. I actually typically lump breach mostly into the privacy side. But what each audit protocol has is some number of things they ask for. They can ask for up to 10 or more documents or types of documentation based on each audit protocol. So what I did was I took column E here highlighted in the slide, and I actually wrote that based on their audit protocols. I broke out the demands, the things they're asking for within this document. And then I actually created that column E in a Word document. So if you wish to have these documents, you simply have to email me and I will send them to you. My column was intended to make it easier to read because as you can see what's on the screen, if there's 180 of these, very difficult to read and prepare for audits. And these audits should be used in preparation in case you want to find out how good you're in compliance. Well, OCR is only asking a very few of these audit protocols. But remember, if anyone ever lodges a complaint against your institution, then that complaint can result in an investigation from OCR where they ask for essentially a lot of the same things here in the audits. So it is good to be prepared for the audits, even though they only audited a very few facilities. There's 17,000 complaints a year, and one of them could be you. So you have to be prepared with your HIPAA privacy and security compliance. Part of the way to prepare is to understand what they're asking for in the audits, because again, it can be very similar to what they ask for in an investigation. They say that they're going to, move on with some permanent audit programs, but we know OCR is going to take a budget hit, as are most other federal agencies. Right now, the Trump administration looks like they've asked for about a 15–16% reduction to the budget for OCR. We don't know if that will, in fact, be an amount that they use, or if it's a different amount or none or more. Who knows? But if they're going to create a structured audit program going forward, they're going to have to compete with having 17,000 complaints to investigate, the fact that we continue to have a lot of patient access issues out in the marketplace that's driving a lot of complaints. So we'll see how this works out, if this works into an audit program for the future. For now, they did 166 covered entity audits. Of those, 103 were privacy, 63 were security, and they did 41 business associate audits, again, chosen from the 20,000 business associates that they actually found or heard of from the folks that they pre-surveyed before the audit. Now, when they went out and they call these desk audits, the reason they're desk audits is because they actually created a web portal and they asked everyone that is being audited to respond by sending the information in through the web portal, and then they communicate back in the email. So there was no on-site visits or any of that stuff, at least in this phase 2 so far. Now, what did they ask of the audit protocols from that 180 audit protocols that I told you that also have up to 10 document type requests per protocol? So that could be about 15 to 1,800, 2,000 items they could ask you in an audit. They only asked these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things. They asked about notice of privacy practices and content requirements, the provision of a notice of the privacy practice. They asked something about right of access. Like I said, that's a hot topic in the whole nation. Timeliness of breach notification, content or breach notification, security management process risk analysis, security management process risk management. Those are the 2 security questions that they asked. So we have not very many items that they ask each site, yet it's taken them a year to analyze the results. So you know that it's sophisticated and they have to try to get it right. I think they were optimistic in what they were trying to do, but as they go through and grind it out, it's quite a challenge to get this stuff together. So again, today we're looking at what I think are the first results to come out of it. Now, in one of the slides that I clipped out, they actually had what they call the compliance effort ratings. This is the legend. And if you look at this slide, you'll notice number 1, that's a good finding. That means, hey, you're doing what you need to do. That's your best answer. That means you're in good shape. Number 2, that's good as well. So I considered, as I looked at this, number 1 and number 2, if you got rated on an answer as a 1 or a 2, you're in good shape. Number 3 is not as that good. It's the intermediate. If you look at the bottom, it says, but implementation is inadequate and some efforts indicate misunderstandings of the requirements. So I can't say if you got rated on any of these as a number 3 that you're doing what you need to be doing. So 3 is kind of intermediate. 4 is the audit results indicate an entity made negligible efforts to comply with the audited requirements, like your policies and procedures were just copied from a template. So, for example, I have a templates for privacy and security policies, but you could never just use the templates. You have to tailor them for use in your organization. That resulted actually in a company, I think it was last year, got fined a big fine because they just used templates and didn't tailor them. So the audit, rating 4 is not very good. You might get unwanted attention from OCR. And then number 5, if you get rated as a number 5, you did not provide OCR with evidence of a serious attempt to comply with the rules or enable the individual rights with regards to PHI. That's bad. I mean, if they find people that have done nothing, then how could they really not refer them for further investigation? I don't know. Maybe they just work with them, but still, you don't want a 5 answer. You don't want a 4 answer. You really don't want a 3 answer. So as we go through the subsequent slides, here's your answer legend, and we're looking for 1s and 2s. So this is how they actually came out with rankings. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this table, but if you look at this, you start seeing some areas where there's some significant number 5s there. And remember, this doesn't even show 2, 3, or 4. This is just the 1s and the 5s. So some of this, you see that folks have done well, others not as well, but we'll see better graphs on this in a moment. So breach questions asked in the 2016 audit. So BNR 12 and BNR 13 means breach notification rule, audit protocol 12, breach notification rule, audit protocol 13. And those numbers, by the way, when they first put, this shows you how they do things, they don't really have it all thought out when they first post. When they first posted the audit protocols, they had no numbers on them. So I had to number them myself later when they came out, when I built my own table from their table that you couldn't download. I had to put my own numbers. Later, they numbered them, and I had to go back and change all the numbers. But anyway, these are two questions they ask in the audits. Using sampling methodologies, upload documentation for 5 brief incidents for the previous calendar year affecting fewer than 500 individuals, documenting dates, et cetera, et cetera. So the timeliness of notification, the dates and the times that you notified is what they're asking under BNR 12. BNR 13, the content of the notification, they wanted to see your breach letter. They wanted you to upload letters if you had more than 5 breach incidents or 5 breach incidents affecting 500 or more individuals for the previous calendar year. Well, we would actually really hope that none of the institutions that they surveyed had breaches over 500 individuals, certainly not more than one, but if you did, you had to provide that information. And then a single copy of a written notice affected individuals for each breach incident. So they're asking for how fast did you notify and what was the content of the letter that you sent out, basically. And this is what they sent us back a table on. Now, some of these charts that I'm going to show you have percentages on them. Others do not. This one has a percentage. So on timeliness of notification, 65% are either 1 or 2. Well, I guess 65% are 1. If you added 2 in there, you'd have 71%. So that's really pretty good. So in timeliness of notification for breaches, it looks like most covered entities are getting it, although you still had 11% that rated 5, which had stuff. The content of notification, that's that BNR 13, not as good. Only really 28% so is good, and 67% by my count not as good because they're 3 through 5. So, so we have to be very careful. And my numbers might be a little bit off, but they're more. I did this kind of fast to get the gist of it. The gist of it is that we're pretty good on getting breach notification out in a timely fashion. We're not as good on the content of the notification meeting all of the requirements. Funny thing is, over the time since the high-tech rules and the interim final rule that came down with them back in 2009, there really haven't been a lot of changes in the content of the breach notification or the timeliness provision. So really not a lot of excuse for anybody not getting a 1 or 2 on this one. But again, in general, these findings were fairly good. Now, when we move over to the next set of questions they asked, P55 and P58, notice of privacy practices content. They wanted to know if you posted an NPP on your website, which you're required to do if you're a covered entity and have a website. They want to see a copy of that and what was in place at the end of the previous calendar year. And then they want to know if they wanted to know the URL for posting the NPP to the website, or the URL for the website where the NPP is, so they can see it out there. And what are your policies and procedures regarding providing this notice to patients electronically if they ask for that, and an agreement with an individual to receive the notice via email. So these are really, again, simple enough asks from OCR. So let's see how we did here. So on the NPP P55, the content of the notice of privacy practices, only 35% or so to the good. And that is really, you see, only 2% were really good. And I would suggest part of that, and again, if you really read this, it would be the notice of privacy practices distributed to individuals in place as the end of the previous calendar year. So it may have been even back as far as 2015, depending on when they were asking these questions. But if you get there and take a look, again, problems with the content of the notice of privacy practices. So I don't know that anybody could be really very pleased with this. So I think what they mostly are saying here is that in general, at least the 39% for the level 3s. They're probably doing an okay job, but probably have a few areas where they're not up to snuff. And I know, for example, in 2016, when they changed or gave out new guidance on the guidelines for patient access requests, they want to make sure that you have documented in there that patients can get copies. They can see, of course, the records in the source systems. They can get copies, or they can direct copies sent to third parties. If you didn't have all of that in there, it may not have met the criteria, but again, timing sort of matters here with when the guidance was issued versus the language they wanted to see in the NPP. Bottom line is the content, not really great. Putting up the NPPs on the web, electronic access to them, having a form for patients or a way for patients to be notified they can receive an NPP via email or whatever electronic notification, that actually came out pretty well. So in that one for P58, those 3 questions they asked for that protocol came out pretty well. Now, one thing to ask about here that again, this is a hot topics, and we want to have a little wider scope when we can in this presentation. So what about taglines? They didn't ask questions about that, but this came out in a Davis, Wright, and Tremaine law blog, and I already knew about it, but they actually made a point, and there's basically, let's see, that is, let's see, I'm not sure if that's the law blog link at the bottom or the ACA non-discrimination taglines. I think that's what that URL is for at the bottom of the page. But bottom line is, do you know that under the Affordable Care Act, which is anybody's guess if they're ever going to repeal that, that you have to have provision that in your notice of privacy practices that you actually have taglines for complaints and things like that within the body that are based on the HHS most common languages for your area and interpreter services. You can see in the second bullet, there is one of the taglines in Spanish there. So there's been a lot of confusion as to whether or not you have to include taglines in your NPPs. The DWT law blog certainly believes that you should do this, and I wanted to say it's not being audited for, but it was something that you ought to be thinking about. Now, will it be repealed? I don't know. But does the Office for Civil Rights enforce this? Yes, they do. So we have to be careful about it, these taglines in these different languages. HHS has the taglines in all these different languages on a web page. They also have a web page that says, what are the most common languages in your area? And then you have to choose the 10 most common, and that's how you create your tagline. So it's not something you have to think up, but it is something to be aware of. I know that I have Florida Blue as an insurance company, and they, in fact, when they sent me their privacy notice with my policy, they had the taglines on their NPP documents. So I thought that was very interesting. Privacy questions asked in 2016 audits about the right of access. Now, again, P65, we know right of access is this huge issue, and I attended a meeting in January in Jacksonville last year, and you know, Northeast Florida was well represented there, and you know, we on and on. That was actually a Board of Medicine meeting, but still, it's basically gets into the same thing: third-party authorizations versus patient rights to access. Ask basically for 5 access requests. Here, 5 access, first 5 access requests, last 5 access requests where they wanted to extend, someone needed to extend the deadline or the response time frame. And you know, if you didn't ever extend your response time frame and you got that question, you would answer OCR. We never had that situation, so we never extended. But any standard template or form letter used for patient access requests, again asking for the notice of privacy practices. I guess to look at the language again about the access request and the policies and procedures for individuals to request access to PHI. So they're going to look at your policy and procedure in this area. So it had better be wired tight and done correctly. It's a big one. They only had one number one here. They had a total of what, 11. Now notice this is not percentage. So this is, I think, out of 63 responses or something like that. So at any rate, 57, maybe it was more than 63. Maybe it was all the privacy ones. But at any rate, these may not be percentages, but you get the point. If the number ones and the number twos are the only good ones and the rest of them are bad, especially number 4, 54 of whatever number they're counting from here, not good. So patient access, right of access, not good results at all. And if you looked at the audit protocol itself in what they could have asked for, they could have asked for these 3 items, and then I have another slide with even more. So the fact that they only asked these 5 items really means they did not ask everything they could have asked, because here are the 3 of the things they could have asked. This slide is intended a little bit as a bad joke. This is the requirements you have to meet in order to successfully comply with the right of access rule. This is all loaded into that protocol document in a single cell. So I wanted just to show you, and it's actually the law, I wanted to show you the complexity of what we are dealing with. Here's some other questions they could ask, like number 6, verify access consistent with policy and procedures. So they're asking from this list of questions, the 5 questions or so that they did in fact ask and we saw the answer to. But I wanted to show you just that they're not even asking all of the questions they could have asked, and we're still not getting good answers out. By the way, again, thinking this is a hot topics presentation, the November-December Journal of HIPAA has actually got quite a few good articles in it. For me, for privacy, for you, for privacy and security, I think it's all good. They've got one from Lucia Savage. She's an attorney that used to be at ONC, the Office of National Coordinator Healthcare IT. She was their privacy officer. She's now in private practice. She had a personal patient access request that she had all kinds of problems getting resolved. That's all outlined here in this article. So I would ask that you read that article if you want some more information on this subject, because it has some interesting perspectives about regulators, covered entities, business associates, etc. Now, security management process risk analysis. I knew this was going to be a problem because I do a lot of compliance work. I have the software, but I do services as well. And we know this is a problem. So the risk analysis is something that is really required by the HIPAA security rule to be done on the security side. There's not a similar requirement on the privacy side, but it can be inferred that you do have to assess the scope and the quality of your compliance on the privacy side, but it doesn't directly ask you to tell you to do that, doesn't give you a format for that, whereas the HIPAA security rule does tell you have to do a security risk analysis. They actually give tools out that show how to do a risk analysis. ONC has a free tool for that. I don't think it's very good, but they have it. I have tools for it, so I understand how to do a risk analysis for both privacy and security. And meaningful use required everyone that was doing an EHR as a part of the meaningful use program to do a security risk analysis on that EHR environment. So this is not a new requirement. It's not something everybody didn't know. There are NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology guidelines for this. But these are the questions that they basically ask. If you have a current risk analysis, what were its results? Upload documentation from the previous calendar year about a risk analysis, and do you review that and update it as needed? Do you have policies and procedures that were in place for 6 years prior to this risk analysis? Policies and procedures regarding your risk analysis process, and documenting the current risk analysis and the most recently conducted prior risk analysis. So they're basically saying you should have been doing these for the last at least 6 years and have records of them. Let's see the copies of the records of them, and what do you have previously and now. That's basically what they're asking for. Nobody met the criteria in number 1. Now, we can imagine that folks are doing okay now, but they just didn't have 6 years worth of data, and maybe that meant a 0. People complied completely. But this is not a new requirement. This is actually an old requirement from 2004. So you would hope that institutions were following it. But even so, if you notice, 55 of the 63, and again, not percentages here, I think these are just raw numbers, not compliant. So they did not do a good job in the covered entities as far as security risk analysis. We had 8 that were in the good zone and 19 intermediate there, but look at that 36 deficient. And so that's a huge red flag. Hang on, excuse me. All right. OCR continuing enforcement issue, incomplete or inaccurate risk analysis. When you see this OCR continuing enforcement issue in the title of my slides, that means I took it from that second slide deck that OCR presented. And here they're saying we have either incomplete or inaccurate risk analysis. And, you know, basically they're saying in bullet 2 that you've got to do an inventory of all of the systems in EPHI in your organization. And that I'm sure it's not seeing that being done. And so apparently they're thinking that a lot of organizations are not doing a full risk analysis across all of their systems, all of their EPHI. And they give some ideas of systems that have to be included in the risk analysis. Now, again, this is a wider scope than what meaningful use required, where meaningful uses was just on the EHR itself. These HIPAAs are, which again have always been in place, is a risk analysis across all your systems that contain EPHI. They think this is such a problem. In a separate slide deck, in a separate presentation, they're saying these are continuing enforcement issues that they have. They give you guidance on risk analysis. So here's some different links to guidances about risk analysis, and they do actually have quite a bit of risk analysis guidance out there. I took their guidance and created a tool to do security risk analysis. Then I had to sort of do my own on privacy, but there is enough information out there to build one of these things. It's a pain. It took a while to do it. So, you know, typically sites use third-party tools for their risk analysis, but you have to be careful with that because some of those risk analysis documents are created for general business, not healthcare. And you want to make sure this is a healthcare security risk analysis according to HIPAA. Again, though, they do have quite a bit of information posted out there about it. They also have the NIST security rule guidance. So the HIPAA security rule was built on NIST guidance, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They actually lay out the standards that they're shooting for. The HIPAA security rule was built on those standards, which are kind of a general open set of standards. They're not really technical guidance. It's more general than that. NIST has been busy. They've created this critical infrastructure for cybersecurity, which is, and we're actually not going to discuss that more later. That's an artifact from a longer deck that I had. But bottom line is that framework document they put out is so that they have a guidelines for any kind of business is cybersecurity, since we've been having so many cybersecurity events for infrastructure. How does this relate to the HIPAA security rule? Well, there's a crosswalk between the two documents, and they are similar, but the cybersecurity framework is more depth and goes in some different places. The security rule doesn't do as much of. So if you're really into security risk analysis, you are going to want to know what's in this other framework, but it isn't necessary to actually use the framework for your own risk analysis. But it is more information, and again, trying to be a little wider in the scope of this slide presentation. So the HIPAA security risk analysis, again, basically is asking for you to review all your policies, procedures, and other documentation that support your organization's security compliance plan. And again, they have a formula. And on the security side, the security rule is written more by computer science type people than the privacy rule. They're actually significantly different styles of the language of the two rules. So they are done differently. And in the security risk analysis, they have a formula where risk equals threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts. So what they're saying there is, what's the threat to your organization? How are you vulnerable? Threat may be hackers stealing information. Vulnerability may be you did not encrypt that information. Impact, if you get hacked and that information goes out the door and you have a breach response, what's the impact to your organization? And impacts could be dollars, could be goodwill to the community, all different kinds of things. Could be a hit to your customer base because they don't trust you anymore because of the breach. So there's a lot of things to consider, but what they're really asking you to do is ask a bunch of questions. That's a security risk analysis. Maybe it's even 200 to 600 questions that you're asking about your organization, the systems that contain EPHI. And then you're taking what fell out that you're not meeting compliance with, and you're assessing the priority of remediating it. And that's the risk, is, you know, what's your priority for remediating the items you identify in your risk analysis. It's hard to shrink this down to smaller operations like physicians' offices, ambulatory sites, etc., but you have to do it. There are ways to do that. It's just hard to do, and it's challenging to the smaller sites. Now, what's challenging to the larger sites, of course, Northeast Florida, and, you know, I'll just have a shout out for the Gators and UF. When you have a big organization like that, and of course, a lot of the facilities, the covered entities, the hospitals in Jacksonville are huge as well. You have hundreds of systems, perhaps, that contain EPHI. So your challenge is the opposite of the smaller sites. It's not how to make the rules apply. It's how to address everything, everywhere EPHI lives in a risk analysis. That's a very large undertaking in a large facility. But there's an art to scaling that down to the small facilities because the rules are not different for anybody. They're all the same. If you've never seen a security risk analysis, this is mine. It's right now in Excel. I'm going to be putting it into a web, into my product, but I haven't quite finished with that yet. So we use a macro-based Excel. And that's what it looks like. That's just a few of the questions. And you see there's questions, answers, comments, action items. I even list in there OCR audit protocol questions. So it's a you know, tool that I think is easy to use, but there are other ones in the marketplace too. I just want to show you an example. So I was talking about a security risk analysis. This is what some of the questions look like. What do they go over in a security risk analysis? Well, you can see from this list a lot of different things. So this is what you cover in an SRA. Now, S3, the security management process risk management, the OCR audit questions on this, and it looks like they have 6 questions here on this process. Basically what they're asking for here is when you did your risk analysis and you found out you have some risk out there and items that you have to remediate or fix, you put that into a risk management plan and you remediate them in order of importance. Typically, that's what you want to do. But you have to have a risk management plan. So you don't just do a risk analysis, security risk analysis, or an SRA. You have to have a risk management plan that's laid out in policy and procedure, and then you execute on that plan based on your risk analysis findings. So they ask questions about that too for the unlucky 63 that got asked security questions. How did they do? Not too good, right? So you've only got 4 out of what, 63 or so, or however many number, it doesn't look like 63, whatever. Anyway, you only got 4 that were really compliant, and you've got a bunch, 49, that are definitely not in compliance. How do you deal with that? How does OCR deal with this? I mean, it's like not even close. Now, maybe they were doing such a fine read on it that there's some latitude there that they're not so uptight that they're going to go out and start doing enforcement actions on this, on these folks, but you can't be happy with these results. They're really not good at all. So again, I don't know what the steps forward are. Again, I did not hear OCR say what their opinion of this was, but just reading the charts, which we should be able to do because the government published them, this is what I take away from it. A continuing enforcement issue, again, out of that second deck that they did at another presentation, failure to manage identified risks. So they're saying right here, several times they investigated breaches, and this is how it works. You report a breach, then they ask questions and investigate things like your policies and procedures, and do you do risk analysis, and do you have risk management? What they're saying here is people are not doing risk management plans properly, and they've uncovered in breach investigations lots of incidents of this. Be very careful. If you uncover in a breach incident that if you have a breach incident that you report, OCR then sends you a letter and says, okay, about this breach, I want you to send us your policy procedure, your last risk analysis, your risk management plan, and you don't have it, looking at a fine, be very, very careful on that, because we do see fines come down like that all the time. That's why whether or not you really get audited doesn't matter, but whether or not you're prepared for an audit or prepared for an investigation, that matters very much. So the OCR audit program update so far, again, I don't think that they can really be that happy with the results. They're promising to have a permanent program, but again, you know, they've got budget cuts, so we'll just have to see how all that goes going forward. They actually had said something like going to sites and actually spending 3 to 5 days at the site doing on-site audits. That sounds like a complete nightmare to me, and I would suggest that we hope they don't do that, because the, you know, woe is be to the site that actually gets that kind of audit and has to deal with it. So what's some other information we've seen on from OCR? Well, certainly patient access request is a problem. We've still seen that a problem. You know, now that there's OCR ONC video out there that basically says, you know, this is patient access, this is what you do if you really don't know whether or not it's a patient access request. You do your best. Hopefully you can ask the patient. We know that in large sites, the ROI vendors have a real hard time with this. They don't have time to call the patients every time they're confused over a response. Now, interesting, they said in here that OCR is seeing a lot of improper mixed access requests, third-party authorization. Same thing we talked about in Jacksonville to the Board of Medicine, same thing FHIMA and Linda Wren and some of us put together to send to OCR that, you know, hey, we're seeing access requests from attorneys that are not really access requests. They're confusing us with forms that contain part authorization and part access requests. What are we supposed to do? And they actually say in the slide deck that if a site can make a good argument, a form is an authorization based on the elements on the form, like having legalese about revocation in there, which an access request form can't have, then OCR will be hard-pressed to hit back very hard if a complaint or investigation ensues because you executed on that result, that request based on thinking it was an authorization because it had authorization components in there. Again, be very careful with that, but that is something we saw. But OCR says, remember, if we investigate a complaint, we're going to try to talk to the patient and find out whether it really was a patient access request or not. So don't know how much that helps you guys, but something I've picked up on and thought I would talk about. Again, they have slides from, you know, the second slide deck where they were talking about other enforcement issues, and they gave this web link out there, and they said you can follow them on Twitter as well. So here are some other things they brought up about their continuing enforcement issues. Lack of business associate agreements. The fact that people are operating covered entities and BAs without BAAs, that's a big deal. I know about that because I do service work in business associates and covered entities, but I see more problems on the business associate sides with lack of having full-blown compliance programs than I ever see on the hospital side. Hospitals are pretty good about it. As you go down in size in the hospitals, they may get a little looser, but typically pretty good about their privacy compliance and business associate agreements. But business associates, a lot of them don't want to be business associates. They want to manage your data without being a BA. They don't want the liability. That's too bad. But we're seeing that OCR is seeing a problem here. We've seen fines come down for not having BAAs. Be very careful with that. Satisfactory assurances. Remember, and we're seeing more of this now, covered entities are starting to ask more questions about their business associates. They're not just saying we've got a contract and a business associate agreement. They're saying, what else are you doing for compliance? Do you have policies, procedures? What risk analysis are you doing? When? What are some of your results? You have to be careful with what anybody that runs an IT shop, even if you're a business associate, you don't want to just turn over a risk analysis. That's too much information about your operation. But you can ask them questions about the risk analysis, and those serve to be satisfactory assurances that you're having business associates meet and be compliant. So we've got that. And then remember, we did some work on a business associate agreement template, and we talked about offshore BAAs. An attorney from Tampa, Tatiana Melnick, helped us, I think, with that. And there's the link in the body of knowledge at HIPAA for that practice brief or that guidance. And I think that was really good guidance. I worked on that because I was on the Privacy Security Practice Council in 2016. So anyway, we are seeing more satisfactory assurances being asked for by the business associates, and I absolutely believe that's the right way to go. Also, business associates should be asking for satisfactory assurances from their subcontractors down chain from them. Continuing enforcement issue, a lack of transmission security. So they really want to get into encryption when you're transmitting data. There's some requirements for that. But also, are you encrypting your email, your texting? Remember, JCH is not in favor of texting. For their requirements, they say no. Text cannot really be secured. There's always a copy of an SMS or an MMS text up at the AT&T or whoever the telecom provider is. So doing security in text, usually when you see some of these text applications that are secure, they're not really using MMS or SMS. They use some other methodology. But anyway, transmission security, encryption, that's a huge area. We want you to encrypt everything that's data at rest, but data in motion has to be encrypted. Lack of appropriate auditing, not going in and looking at audit log monitors or audit logs, not monitoring your databases and appropriately auditing for privacy compliance especially is a continuing enforcement issue that they have found. And, some hospitals are using audit log monitoring companies, Fair Warning, Iatrix, Maze Analytics, for example, or three of them out there. And there are some new ones that are coming down. There's a new one I saw at Privacy and Security Institute. I don't know a lot about them. They were called Protenus. They don't act like the other audit log monitors. These folks use data analytics. It's a different style of monitoring. I think we're coming into a new age of monitoring. I'm actually going to talk about that in some of my other presentations. But that is interesting that they've seen a lack of enforcement or a lack of appropriate auditing that they need to enforce on. Keeping software up to date, you always have to keep your software up to date because if you don't, you risk security violations. That's how they patch these holes that hackers find with updates, and they have to be kept up to date. What they're saying is they're not seeing that done across the board the way it should be done. Insider threats, they're seeing problems with folks inside that are stealing information or doing snooping, things like that. So again, that's a problem. They want to see termination procedures. They want to know that when somebody's terminated, their access to all their systems is revoked. really within an hour or not much longer than that. Of course, it's hard to do in the larger organizations, but you have to have a good, solid termination procedure and deprovisioning to go with it, and that's part of the insider threats. Insufficient backup and contingency planning, that happens a lot. You know, it's not only do you have backups, if you get ransomware, you're going to have to recover from backups. You don't want to pay those people and hope they fix you. Are you backing up? Are you testing? Do you have contingency planning? They're seeing issues with that in their enforcement. And also in disposing of PHI, I think a lot of that is disposing of PHI on portable devices. I think we solved a lot of that in copy machines and stuff with hard drives, but still disposable PHA is a hot spot for them that they're seeing out there as they enforce. So in conclusion, I want to try to get done here in a second so we can have a couple of questions if need be. You know, it's only getting tighter. OCR continues to audit. I can't imagine they're happy with what they've been seeing in the audit so far, but maybe I'm wrong. And patient access request continues to be a big issue, but this security risk analysis, risk management plan, that's huge, and you really absolutely have to be able to do that. Here's my contact info. If you have questions, I'm always around. I'm always available to answer questions. I do that all day long, answer people's questions. So, you know, don't hesitate to ask if you do. Do we have any questions? Since by my satellite clock, I see we got 4 minutes left. I don't see anything in the chat box.
So I have unmuted everybody. If you do have any questions, this is a good time to ask. Questions?
Silence is golden, I guess.
Yeah, silence is great. All right.
All right, everyone. Well, look, I'm around if you need, you know, again, you can certainly ask me questions, and I thank you so much for having me. I hope that everyone has a great holiday season, and, you know, it's not too long, and maybe we can start winding down for a couple weeks, but, you know, have a happy holiday season, and y'all are north of me, so stay warm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelly. We really appreciate the information. It was timely and it was great. And then as far as the rest of everybody goes, please keep in mind that come January 19th, we're going to be having our regional meeting in Gainesville coming up. So there'll be information coming out on that here sometime soon. So again, if you do have any questions, let us know. We'll get you some answers. Otherwise, everybody have a great day. And thank you again, Kelly.